U.S. President Donald Trump has told supporters at a rally in Michigan that his first 100 days in office have delivered what he called a revolution of common sense. But in what critics are calling yet another climb down in his global trade war, he said he would reverse some of the tariffs threatening to hurt the local car industry. Elsewhere, his presidency appears to be as polarizing as ever.
Donald J. Trump.
And I'm proud to be an American.
Much like his favourite walk-in song, US President Donald Trump says he's blessed the USA with his leadership.
We're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country.
In a campaign-style rally near Detroit, Michigan, Trump spoke for close to 90 minutes, celebrating a laundry list of executive orders he'd signed, bringing manufacturing back to the US, deporting illegal migrants, and getting rid of paper straws.
We've accomplished more in 3 months than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or even 8 years, and we're just getting started.
For many of his supporters, there was one standout accomplishment.
I think the border by far has been the greatest accomplishment we've had this term.
The border. It surprised me how fast he was able to correct it, but that was why I voted for him, and super glad it's done.
Everything. He does something every day that makes us all happy.
It's a sentiment shared by fewer and fewer Americans. The latest Ipsos poll has the president's approval rating down 5 points since he took office. Now, just 42% of Americans say they approve of the work he is doing, the lowest of any US president in 80 years. But Trump had an answer for that too.
They interview Democrats by big numbers and then Republicans by small. They say, Trump only has a 44% approval rating. Well, it's actually not bad. But when you figure that if it were a legit poll, it would be in the 60s or 70s.
On the sidelines of the rally, counter-protesters said they had good reason why Americans aren't approving of their leader.
We're in the beginning of a fascist authoritarian coup and a constitutional crisis.
He's a felon. He's not good for our country or the world.
He's a fascist. He's attacking immigrants. He is not following the Constitution.
Trump's opponents were not spared. What he called radical left lunatics, communist judges and the fake news media were all targeted. But with the promise of America's golden age, Trump and his supporters are happy to be dancing to their own tune.
There's no need to feel down, I said, yeah.
Now, when it comes to the economy, stock markets viewed the United States as outpacing Europe on the eve of Trump's inauguration. But now, after 100 days, concerns about an impending economic crisis in America are growing.
Liberation Day, April the 2nd. This list shocked the world. Higher tariffs apply both to major U.S. trading partners and smaller economies, allies and rivals alike.
To the USA.
Investors all around the world were astonished. The global economy has not been confronted with tariffs of this magnitude for decades. The S&P 500 lost more than 10% the following days. Trillions of dollars were lost. The Economist called it Ruination Day. Many investors, Obliteration Day. Facing a global market meltdown just 1 week later, Donald Trump abruptly backed off his tariffs on most nations for 90 days, giving markets a relief, but nerves are still frayed. Many investors fear that President Trump's tariffs, whatever their eventual form, will stoke inflation and depress economic growth.
This economy was in good shape without this uncertainty. So we know we have a stable base, but as businesses and consumers pause, we could get a self-fulfilling slowdown. We even could eventually get a recession if businesses in particular feel they can't make investment decisions.
President Trump aims to make imports pricier to boost U.S. manufacturing. European pharma giants Roche and Novartis have announced major U.S. investments, but Tata Technology from India and Italy's Pirelli have postponed theirs over tariff uncertainty. Uncertainty worldwide usually means investors flock to buy U.S. bonds and U.S. dollars, generally regarded as safe haven assets, but not this time. On Trump's inauguration day, for instance, you almost got €1 for $1. Now you get 88 euro cents. That's a 3-year low.
Greater policy uncertainty, lower U.S. growth prospects, and an adjustment in the global demand for dollar assets are weighing down on the dollar. Risks to the global economy have increased and are firmly to the downside.
Markets also plunged after Trump ramped up attacks on Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Trump wants him to lower interest rates, saying it would boost the economy. But Powell argues that would do more harm than good.
Toward our goals over the past 2 years.
Most Americans now have little confidence in President Trump's economic management, a Pew survey showing almost 6 in 10 disapprove of his tariff policies.
Now, President Trump's first 100 days have caused more than just ripples in the global economy. Daniel Winter's with me in the studio from our business department. Daniel, the tariffs have really come to define Trump's economic policy. What's been their impact?
Well, Gerhard, I wish I could talk about this all day because there's so many aspects to this. But at their worst, we could be seeing a reconfiguration of the global economic order with the US at the centre that we've had for decades. But we don't actually know the tangible impact yet, because that will filter down in quarterly reports. When we get the second quarter, third quarter reports, that's when we'll see what the impact is. But we've got certain institutions in the United States that watch these things, are watching things like shipping movements and this kind of stuff, that expect up to a 1 percentage point of GDP growth hit to the US. Now, obviously, in American terms, that is billions and billions of dollars, and that will filter down into other aspects of the economy. We could see job losses, we could see wage reductions, we could see rising inflation in the US. So this would be bad news for the most vulnerable people there in the United States. But also the big difficulty is the uncertainty. And as
back and forth.
Absolutely. We saw it with on Tuesday when he mentioned that he's going to walk back some of the tariffs for US car makers specifically, saying that they're going to stop the stacking of tariffs temporarily. Stacking where you have a certain part, it goes over the border back and forth a few times, and so you add the tariff on each time. So the tariff is still going to be there, just not stacking the tariffs, multiplying it on top. So that's kind of a relief, in part at least, but that's only temporary, and there's more uncertainty to come.
So what's, besides the uncertainty, which is, of course, poison for companies, what's the reasoning behind his rather tough stance on international trade?
Well, he sees the trade deficit that the US has, where essentially it's buying in a lot more than it's selling abroad, as the US leaking money and jobs to other countries. Other countries are taking advantage of it. But the fact is, the reality is very different. Take a Chinese company. They sell something to the US buys it in dollars. What does this Chinese company do with those dollars? It reinvests them in the US. That's how they're going to get growth in their money. And that's a benefit to the United States. That's how it's worked for ages. But what Trump says is it's not just about this, it's about the so-called non-tariff barriers. That's where there's regulations or rules in other countries which make it more difficult for the US to do business there. Now, in many of these points, the Trump administration is probably right to say that regulations are quite high in some places. But then it is up to the US to be able to say, we're going to go into negotiations and discuss these things. And that's what a lot of business leaders and investors would have preferred to have seen from the start, rather than rushing to tariffs.
Now, what are business leaders and economists looking out for in the next 100 days?
Well, they'll definitely be looking out for those quarterly results, as I mentioned, that's for sure, just to track the material impact on the US economy. They'd like to see a rolling back of tariffs, of course, and it is now currently questionable as to whether they will actually gain any meaningful concessions in the US. There will be concessions, countries going to the US and saying, we'll remove some of these tariff barriers or whatever they might be, the non-tariff barriers. But whether they're going to have a meaningful impact to the benefit of the US economy, that remains to be seen. But one newspaper put it this way today, saying that America could be weeks away from a mighty economic shock.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you very much. Daniel Winter there from our business department. Well, after just 100 days of Donald Trump's second presidency, the world is a different place and the US is a different country. Let's take a closer look now at how President Trump is remaking his country and its relationship with the world.
imposing steep tariffs on rivals and allies alike, then pausing them, blaming Ukraine's president for the war on his country, then having a conciliatory meeting with him at the Vatican, slashing long-standing foreign aid programs. Just a few snapshots of Donald Trump's governing style in his second term. Trump has been dismantling democratic safeguards through executive orders, ignoring Congress and the courts, ripping up old alliances, operating at a high rate of speed, ignoring rules, values, traditions, and the post-World War II order along the way. Transatlantic relations have been upended by a series of flip-flops, leaving allies unsure where they stand. The NATO alliance has come under heavy strain. Trump said in March that the U.S. would not defend allies who don't spend enough on defense, questioning Article 5 of NATO's founding charter, which states that an attack on one member country is an attack on all, shaking decades of European reliance on the U.S. for security. And he's mused about expanding U.S. territory, aiming to acquire Greenland, a territory of Denmark, a NATO ally, and the Panama Canal, and even Canada. Ukraine has gone back and forth from being a valued ally to a pariah that the U.S. government has openly disparaged, and back again, prizing raw deal-making over diplomacy with mixed messages, alternating claims of great progress and threats to move on from trying to settle the conflict. In the Middle East, Trump unconditionally backs Israel's embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A Gaza ceasefire that Trump helped broker in January, even before he took office, later fell apart, with no end of fighting now in sight. After promising to keep the U.S. out of new wars, the military has escalated strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen, deepening its role in yet another Middle Eastern conflict. Trump's declaration of tariffs, what he called Liberation Day, on the whole world, kicked off uncertainty and threatens the world economy. Trump imposed baseline tariffs of 10% worldwide. Tariffs on EU goods were later set at 20%. The U.S. stock market plunged, and Trump paused the tariffs, except for China, which imposed tariffs of its own, part of an escalation, leaving China now with a tariff rate of 145%. That depressed stock markets around the world, leading to predictions of recession and less growth, and fears that the U.S. is too unreliable to be at the center of the world economy. Foreign aid has taken a severe hit since the U.S. has retreated from its role as the biggest global actor and donor. Trump's efficiency consultant Elon Musk shut down USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, cutting off life-saving medications and food supplies to some of the world's most vulnerable people. At the 100-day mark, it all adds up to a confusing mess for leaders trying to figure out the new order. With nearly 4 years of this presidency to go, the U.S. is no longer a dependable center of power and influence, forcing the rest of the world to form new alliances without America, with unforeseeable consequences.
And for some more insight, I'm pleased to welcome political analyst Brandon Bourne from the Bertelsmann Foundation's Europe programs. Welcome to the studio, Brandon. Trump claimed, of course, as he would, his first 100 days were the most successful of any president. What do you say?
Well, they've certainly been consequential. 144 executive orders, the most ever passed by a president in the first 100 days ever. It hasn't followed the traditional landscape of the first 100 days, but then again, I don't think that was really the point, to follow tradition. I had a conversation with an advisor of Trump earlier this year who endearingly described Trump as a sledgehammer, somebody who would crack away at the status quo and use these 100 days to crack away at it. And the reality is that sledgehammers inherently destroy things. And, I think what, for an increasing number of Americans, but also international partners, in the midst of the rubble, if you will, created, where does the U.S. go from here? Now that international relationships are in some cases in tatters and economic and foreign policy seems to oscillate every other day.
Also, it seems many have said that he just delivered on his promises, but his approval ratings are dropping. So is he really?
Well, I mean, I think, to the report you just heard, the immigration issues are certainly landing with his base. That's something that he ran on very clearly. But on several other issues, whether it's the Russia-Ukrainian war, ending that war in a day, as he said he would do, on the tariff policy, simultaneously this economic boom that would come with his presidency. Now he's saying, well, actually wait off a bit because, the tariffs might have adverse effects in the short term, but it'll be the short-term pain is worth the long-term gain, essentially.
There was one moment in these first 100 days that was quite pivotal, if you will. That was a visit of Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House. What effect did that interaction have, not only on Zelensky, but mainly on European leaders?
Well, I think on the one hand, it sent signals very clearly to Europeans that the U.S. role in Ukraine moving forward is very much in question, and we're seeing that every other week, seemingly. If you look last week to the Vatican, that conversation looked very different than the one that took place in the Oval Office. Recently, it shows that U.S. strategy in some cases is not being dictated by doctrine or real strategy. It's being dictated by an individual whose mind changes seemingly with the last conversation that he has. But I think for European leaders, the big question is, how do we engage with this administration? Building personal relationships seems to be key, but simultaneously, you have to come to the table with a pre-designed structure in mind, with ready to have a difficult conversation to defend your interests, and especially for Europeans, the EU is seen more as a foe than a friend by this administration, which inherently undermines the European project. Coming to the table with ready to have dialogue, but also defend the interests of the European Union.
The interests of the Europeans is one thing. The security of Europe is another. There are serious doubts that Trump would actually, if Article 5 is invoked, would come to the rescue or to the help if for example, a European NATO member would be attacked. Is that justified?
I think the concerns that Europeans have about the U.S. commitment to European security is well-founded, given the various statements given by the president. What I'd say is one of the first confirmations was Trump's ambassador to NATO. He said all the right things in his confirmation hearing. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, introduced the very legislation that disallows a U.S. president from unilaterally leaving that institution. But in reality, I think there's a mutual recognition among Europeans and the United States that the U.S. focus is shifting away from Europe and towards the Indo-Pacific region, and that Europeans will have to fill that gap at some point.
Brandon Bourne there, the Bertelsmann Foundation's Europe program. Thank you very much, Brandon.
Thank you.